Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And lots to cover as usual. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are small, but we are mighty. It's interesting how unpopular this particular news story is. So I've been watching this. That's a loud noise. I've been watching. There's this other channel that I have been frequenting lately, and the guy, he's talking more so about some conspiracy stuff, but this particular host had an interesting kind of formula for popularity and views versus how true or not true. The loud cat also trying to get everybody's attention. Hold on one second. That is annoying. All right, where was I? So I was talking about this host who had a correlation between the truthfulness of a message and the number of views that it received. So he was I cannot continue like this. Hold on. I have no idea what's going on. I know what this cat looks like, and it's just meowing from some place beyond my view. Anyways, I was saying, the host was saying there's a correlation between the truth of a message and how many views a channel got. And he was correlating, he was mainly discussing in this one series of videos, 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, the less true a message is, you know, your viewership expands tenfold. So obviously, we all know this to be true, right? You know, the denier sites have tons and tons and tons of traffic, and the actual climate change covering the facts sites or covering climate change sites have very, very little traffic. And then there's, you know, variations in between. Another interesting thing that this host had to say was that alternative news sites aren't really alternative. A lot of them are controlled opposition, and I happen to agree with that. Because the messaging seems to be, even though they may portray themselves as alternative, some of the messaging is actually quite mainstream. Anyways, that's just a little something, and neither here nor there. We are all here, and so is the cat. I wanted to start with a new article by Darja. I have no idea what, hold on. Anyways, let me try to get this video done sometime today. This is from Darja. This is from yesterday, from Truth Out. How feedback loops are driving runaway climate change. And I think we already all understand how this works. I'm sure he will explain in more detail. If you think the summer has been intense as far as record warm temperatures, wildfires, droughts, flooding events around the northern hemisphere, you haven't seen anything yet, unless you happen to live in the Arctic. According to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, air temperatures there are increasing at an unprecedented rate. At an unprecedented rate, twice as fast as they are around the rest of the globe. NOAA's 2017 Arctic report card states unequivocally, the Arctic shows no signs of returning to a reliably frozen region of recent past decades. The executive summary of the report also adds Arctic paleo reconstructions, which extend back millions of years, indicate that the magnitude and pace of the 21st century sea ice decline and surface ocean warming is unprecedented in at least the last 1,500 years and likely much longer. A recent report from the National Geographic revealed that some of the ground in the Arctic is no longer freezing, even during the winter. Along with causing other problems, this will become yet another feedback loop in the Arctic, causing yet more greenhouse gases to be released from permafrost than are already being released and impacting the entire planet. Simplest explanation for a positive climate feedback loop is this: the more something happens, the more it happens. One of the most well-known examples is the melting of sea ice in the Arctic during the summer, which is accelerating as greater amounts of Arctic summer sea ice melt away. Less sunlight is reflected back into space, hence more light is absorbed into the ocean, which warms it and causes more ice to melt, and on and on. Dr. Ira Leifer is an academic researcher who specializes in bubble-related oceanographic processes, such as subsea bubble plumes emanating from the ocean floor, satellite remote sensing, and air pollution. Working closely with NASA on some of his projects, Leifer uses the agency's satellite data to study methane in the Arctic and its role in climate disruption. One of his concerns about a feedback loop already at play in the Arctic is how the heating of that region is already being amplified by ocean currents and that transport warmer, more southerly waters northwards into Arctic seabed waters, where it can affect methane deposits in submerged permafrost and sub-seabed methane hydrates. The release of this methane contributes powerfully to overall warming. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, which actually has a bigger effect on the atmosphere's radiative balance than carbon dioxide on decadal timescales, Dr. Leifer told Truth Out. Although climate is generally thought to occur on century timescales, human timescales and ecological adaptation timescales are measured in decades instead of centuries. And this is now how many climate processes are being monitored given the rapidity of human-forced planetary warming. Dr. Peter Wadhams is a world-renowned expert who has been studying Arctic sea ice for decades. His prognosis for the Arctic sea ice is grim. He says it is in a death spiral. Multi-year ice is now much less than 10% of the area of the ice cover. It was 60% or more before 2000. Dr. Wadhams told Truth Out, sea ice extent in summer is down to 50% of its value in the 1980s. Dr. Wadhams is also the president of the International Association for the Physical Sciences of the Ocean, or IAPSO, noted that this primary feedback loop is much further along than most of us realize. I see the summer sea ice disappearing by the early 2020s, Wadhams said. He noted that the change of albedo, a measure of reflection of solar radiation due to the loss of sea ice and snowline retreat across the Arctic, is sufficient to add 50% to the warming effect of CO2 emissions alone. Alarmingly, on August 21st, Arctic scientists told The Guardian that the oldest and strongest sea ice in the Arctic had broken up for the first time in recorded history. One of them described the event as scary, in part because it occurred off the north coast of Greenland, which is normally frozen year-round. The region has long been believed to be the last ice area. It was thought, at least until now, to be the final place that would hold out against the melting impacts from an increasingly warmer planet. Temperatures are rising, abrupt acceleration. Temperatures are rising most strongly in the Arctic, with some areas already showing an increase of as much as 5.7 degrees Celsius, or 10.26 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Michael McCracken, chief scientist for climate change programs with the Climate Institute in Washington, D.C., explained to Truth Out how, now that the Arctic is warmer, the temperature gradient between the tropics and the traditionally cold Arctic is reduced. With a reduced gradient, the movement of warmth from low to high latitudes is slowed. As Earth rotates, this leads to a wavier jet stream that can carry low latitude warmth up to Alaska and elsewhere in the Arctic, and the southward reach of cold air in the Arctic to lower latitudes. This explains why New Orleans, for example, has recently experienced unusual freezing winter weather. And I've been there in that unusual freezing winter weather in New Orleans. It's quite weird. In addition, the waves in the jet stream that result are shifting to the east less rapidly, which means the unusual weather patterns that are more frequently occurring are moving eastward less rapidly, said Dr. McCracken. So both wet and dry periods are lasting longer, contributing to both excessively wet, e.g. flooding, and excessively dry, e.g. wildfire conditions. Dr. Wadhams is concerned about this as well. The jet stream effect is because the Arctic air is warming faster than tropical air, so the temperature difference is decreasing. He explained this reduces the driving force on the jet stream, so it then meanders, which brings hot air to the higher latitudes and cold air. There's that cat. Cold air to some low latitudes. Summer weather patterns are now increasingly likely to become stalled out over places like North America, portions of Asia, and Europe. According to a recent climate study that showed how a warming Arctic is causing heat waves in other places to become more intense and persistent due to a slowing of the jet stream. And right on cue. Dr. Leifer warned that as these processes continue and the Arctic continues to heat up faster than the tropics, the pole equator temperature difference that controls our weather and causes three major weather circulation cells, tropical, mid-latitude, and Arctic, will merge into a single weather cell. A similar merging of weather cells occurred during the time of the dinosaurs. The jet stream, which controls seasonal storms in the mid-latitudes, is a result of these three cells and would disappear in a single weather cell planet, dramatically altering rain patterns and almost certainly heralding an ecosystem catastrophe, Leifer said. The plants that underlie the food chain would be replaced by others that the local animals, insects to apex predators could not utilize. In short, an abrupt acceleration of the current Great Anthropocene extinction event. The diminishment of the jet stream also contributes to another potentially catastrophic feedback loop within the Arctic seabed. Changes to the jet stream are causing longer and more intense heat waves to occur across the Arctic, which of course cause the Arctic Ocean to warm further. Kevin Lister, an associate with the Climate Restoration Foundation in Washington, D.C., co-authored a paper with Dr. McCracken for the United Nations that address the crisis in the Arctic, among other climate disruption-related issues. Unlike the most commonly accepted idea that global... Okay. All right, sorry for the choppiness of this video. This is kind of out of control. I think I figured out what's happened is that, so we have the stray cat that kind of lives in the bushes behind our house, and every, couple times a year, the cat has a bunch of babies, and the babies actually end up getting, dying or getting eaten by other, predators. But I think one of the babies got stuck underneath my house, and that's why it's just like screaming and crying. That's the only thing I can figure out. I can't actually see the cat, but I can hear it. Anyways, sorry for all the interruptions, guys. I'm gonna really, really try and finish this video. It's getting a little dumb at the moment. Unlike the most commonly accepted idea that global temperature should not be allowed to increase by more than 1.5 C, Lister told Truth Out that the planet reaching 1.5 C above baseline is fundamentally dangerous, and that the rate of change we are seeing today means we will not even be able to stop the temperature at this level. Let me read that again. It's fundamentally dangerous, and that the rate of change we are seeing today means we will not even be able to stop the temperature at this level. Lister said this conclusion was reached in part due to initial observations from Dr. Wadhams regarding how the loss of sea ice was amplifying rates of change in the Arctic. Lister told Truth Out that methane emissions in the Arctic are already a severe risk, and that he and Dr. McCracken's UN paper show that once temperatures started rising, they would be largely unstoppable due to the interacting nature of the feedback mechanisms. Thus, one feedback mechanism such as sea ice melting can trigger another such as methane releases, which then accelerates the first in a tightening spiral, he explained. In reality, there are many critical feedback mechanisms, and the interlocking effects between them means that the climate is far more unstable and irreversible than we are led to believe, and the climate's change is likely to follow a super exponential progression once the temperature rises above a certain level. Dr. Lever, who has been studying Arctic methane for years, shares the same concern. There is the potential for seabed methane deposits off Greenland to be destabilized by the input of warm meltwater and also heat transport, he said, in addition to having pointed out that this process has been occurring in other areas around the Arctic for many years. As I have written in the past, we are currently facing the very real possibility of a major methane release in the Arctic. Such a release would be a catastrophe for the global climate and the survival of humans and other species. Could a dire situation lead to a war for survival? Lister and Dr. McCracken both believe that the global focus on a maximum allowable temperature increase target of 1.5 C above baseline is both dangerous and unachievable. Most media and governmental attention has centered on keeping the Earth from warming 2 C over pre-industrial revolution baseline temperatures, and ideally limiting warming to 1.5 C. This is based on a politically agreed upon goal set forth during the 2015 Paris climate talks, which were non-binding. It reflects the way that intergovernmental climate change policy has been managed, which has been to arbitrarily set a temperature target, which was firstly 2 C and then latterly 1.5 C. And then to see if economic and political policy can deliver an appropriate carbon budget, Lister explained. This is clearly not a rational way to develop climate change policy. Lister and Dr. McCracken both believe that in an ideal world, the process would be the other way around. Governments would decide a safe temperature rise based on the best science and then set an appropriate climate change policy, but this is not the world we live in. Mark Serres, the director of the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, recently pointed out how the Arctic climate system has entered uncharted territory so that even computer models are no longer providing a reliable guide to the future. Dr. Lever said that even if we prepare for the inevitable sea level rise from Greenland melting alone, accelerated melting there is very bad, quote unquote, as it reduces the time to implement plans. However, he noted, most countries are not in preparation mode to begin with. For example, a forward-looking society would encourage relocation through, say, tax incentives and disincentives from, say, most of Florida to higher ground, even purely on a hurricane insurance basis, he said. Sadly, forward-looking is incompatible with our political system's biannual money festival, aka elections. Still, very few other countries are doing better, excepting some Northern European countries like Holland. Despite differences, the impacts of climate disruption aren't waiting for our preparations or lack thereof. Dr. Lever believes that sooner or later the sea levels will rise dramatically. Once this happens, he believes coastal cities will have to be abandoned due to sea level rise and increasingly destructive hurricanes. He believes that the sooner that temperature departure happens, the less destruction and loss of human lives we will experience. Dr. Lever also expressed concern about the changes to the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, AMOC, which is currently weakening and already at its weakest in at least the last 1,600 years. Dr. McCracken told Truth Out that his greatest concern about Arctic feedback loops is that of the melting of the plateau of the Greenland ice sheet. He explained that the meltwater and warmth at the surface is penetrating down into the ice sheet, softening it enough that the glacial ice has started flowing outward, and as this happens, the surface of the ice sinks to lower altitudes. This kicks in a feedback loop that ultimately causes warming to accelerate, which causes the ice to flow faster, which further accelerates this melting. The ice making up the Greenland ice sheet holds about the equivalent of 6 to 7 meters, 20 feet of global sea level rise, and glaciological evidence makes clear that an order of approximately half of that melted during the last interglacial about 125,000 years ago, contributing significantly to the 4 to 8 meters rise in sea level at that time, Dr. McCracken said. He pointed out that this rise was caused by a 1 sea temperature increase, similar to the temperature increase Earth is experiencing right now, 1.16 above baseline. At that time, the atmospheric CO2 concentration was near 300 parts per million, and the warming was due to differences in the Earth's orbit around the sun. Today, the orbital parameters are less favorable to significant warming, but the CO2 concentration is a good bit higher and growing, Dr. McCracken said, and its warming influence acts all year long, making it not surprising that the loss of mass of ice from the Greenland ice sheet is going up rapidly with a stronger and stronger influence on sea level around the world. The rapidly melting Greenland ice sheet is precisely what is causing the AMOC to slow. Moreover, an Arctic that is continuing to warm could lead to the failure of the Gulf Current, Dr. Leifer said. The resultant deep freeze that would hit Europe would destroy European agriculture and likely lead to a massive war for survival. How's that for good news? On that note, I'm going to link a Robert Fanny video, Robert Scribbler, whichever, talking about the next few days being 4C, likely 4C above normal temperatures. All right, yes, so I'm going to link that Robert Scribbler video below. Okay, so here's the deal. The cat is in the garage in my studio. That's why it was so dang loud. I just saw it kind of jet back into the stuff that's behind me, so I can't see it now again. Anyways, I'm sure you're all riveted by this cat saga. Moving on, trying to move on in this video. It's getting ridiculous. So on that note, the Arctic is warming and we're all screwed. This is from August 23rd, 2008 from dig.com. And don't see an author. Doom and hot gloom. In the midst of the Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Donald Trump news bonanza this week, oh, that's already been topped. Some important news got buried. Okay, the Trump news isn't important, but we're talking important in terms of long-term survival of the human race in the face of climate change. And recent signs from the Arctic shows that those chances of surviving aren't great. Here's what's going on. The oldest and thickest ice is breaking up since we started keeping records. The sea ice to the north of Greenland has never broken up. That just changed. One meteorologist described the loss of the ice as scary, quote unquote. Others said that it could force scientists to revise their theories about which part of the Arctic will withstand warming the longest. The sea ice off the north coast of Greenland is normally so frozen that it was referred to until recently as the last ice area because it was assumed that this would be the final northern holdout against the melting effects of a hotter planet. The permafrost may not be so permanently frosty in the future. Permafrost is exactly what its name says it is, a permanently frozen layer of the Earth sitting below the surface of the Arctic, except, well, that might be changing, as the surface layer that insulates the permafrost appears to no longer be freezing in certain areas. Chersky is one of the coldest spots on Earth. Even in late spring, ground below the surface should be frozen solid. Except this year it wasn't. Researchers found sections 30 inches deep, soils that typically freeze over Christmas or before Christmas, that had stayed damp and mushy all winter. For the first time in memory, ground that insulates deep Arctic permafrost simply did not freeze in winter. This really is astounding, said Max Holmes, an Arctic scientist with the Woods Hole Research Center in Massachusetts. Big trouble with a potential permafrost thaw is what it holds, a bunch of trapped greenhouse gases, which would theoretically accelerate climate change if released into the atmosphere. It also contains a lot of mercury. Mercury is a neurotoxin known to cause cognitive dysfunction and other ailments. Even small amounts can affect a developing fetus in utero. But mercury is also naturally occurring, like the kind that's been locked away for millennia in the ancient frozen soils of Arctic permafrost, and there's a lot more of it there than we realize. It's getting weirdly hot up there. An alarming heat wave in the sunless winter Arctic is causing blizzards in Europe and forcing scientists to reconsider even their most pessimistic forecasts of climate change, although it could yet prove to be a freak event. The primary concern is that global warming is eroding the polar vortex, the powerful winds that once insulated the frozen north. The North Pole gets no sunlight until March, but an influx of warm air has pushed temperatures in Siberia up by as much as 35 C above historical averages this month. Greenland has already experienced 61 hours above freezing in 2018, more than 3 times as many hours as in previous years. UC Irvine grad students put together a set of visualizations showing the rising temperatures in the Arctic. This one clearly shows the trend over the recent decades. We might be feeling the effects of the Arctic warming right now. Researchers are theorizing that the heat wave that swept across the northern hemisphere in July was at least in part caused by the knock-on effects of Arctic warming. Given that the Arctic is warming at least twice as fast as anywhere else in the world, research professor in marine and coastal sciences at Rutgers University, Jennifer Francis, says that the temperature difference between Arctic and equatorial winds becomes smaller and smaller. This is weakening the winds of the jet stream, she said. This creates weather patterns on the surface that tend to also get stuck in one place for a long time. In particular, researchers have begun to suggest that Arctic influence changes in summer circulation patterns can cause weather systems in certain parts of the world to get stuck or to persist for abnormally long periods of time, sometimes with devastating consequences. Long periods of hot, dry weather can lead to extreme heat waves, droughts, or wildfires, for instance, while long-lasting rainfall leads to floods. But the exact mechanisms driving these persistent weather patterns, any other potential links to Arctic warming remain a subject of debate. Why? The Atlantic Ocean is encroaching on the Arctic Ocean. And thus, a harmful feedback loop is born. With less sea ice forming in and being transported to these two areas, there is less freshwater transport as well. The trend is key because it allows the well-mixed Atlantic waters to make inroads into the frontier region of the Arctic, in turn discouraging the formation of more sea ice and feeding an ongoing cycle. But don't worry, it's good for business. People have been looking to find a faster route above Canada for centuries, and the decline of Arctic sea ice means we're going to be seeing even more of that. Maersk, the world's largest container line, is about to test the frigid waters of the Arctic in a trial of shorter shipping lanes that could become viable as warmer temperatures open up the Northern Sea route. On or around September 1st, Denmark-based Maersk plans to send its first container ship through the Arctic to explore, and they did, whether the once inhospitable route become feasible, and it was, in the future. Many analysts see the test as a turning point for both the shipping industry and the Arctic. Turning point indeed. We will have to yet see what happens this winter. The last few winters have been extremely warm in the Arctic, abnormally and dangerously warm in the Arctic. We've seen above freezing episodes in the Arctic during the winter, which is unheard of, unimaginable, and should be frightening the pants off of everyone who understands what this means. It is now almost 2019, and we will see what this winter brings for warming in the Arctic. As far as stuck weather patterns, we definitely have been experiencing those in Southern California, right? I mean, it feels like we're in one right now. There is a little bit of wind, but what happens a lot is that you just get these very still, dry, warm days, and they last days on days on days on days. So we're getting very stuck weather patterns here that tend to just mainly be dry and warm. Other places are getting whatever they're getting, whether it's warm or cold or rain or dry. They just get days and days and days in a row of the same weather, and it's causing problems. I'm going to link all these articles below. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. I'm going to go see if I can root this cat out of the garage so that it can be free to join its mom running playfully in the backyard until it meets up with a raccoon or a coyote or a possum or one of those really friendly critters. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.